Hello everybody, my name is Galactic Gaming and welcome to my Proton Cannon Scalar Volley build featuring the Adamant Intel Heavy Raider. Proton Damage has always been a bit of a niche damage type within Star Trek Online. It was originally introduced to deal extra damage against the Voth in the Dyson Battle Zone spheres, and for the most part of the game, they didn't do much else apart from that. But lately we've been getting more Proton related stuff in the form of various new events, ships, and basic other stuff. So let's see what I put together on this build. In my forward weapon slots, if that would just fix itself up, you can see I've got the Dyson Proton weapon, which has a crit chance. It has a crit chance modifiers on it. I honestly should have re-rolled these to damage modifiers because my thinking when I was re-engineering this weapon was to get more chance to trigger the proc of it. But if I just re-engineered this to do the damage modifier, I would have just done more damage outright. So if you do end up doing this build, I recommend re-engineering this particular weapon to damage modifiers. But the reason why I went with this weapon is because it's one of the very few weapons in the game that deals pure proton damage. And that's actually something else I want to bring up. There's only really 4 weapons within this game that really do proton damage, and not including experimental weapons, which is this weapon, the Parvin Proton Energy Torpedo Launcher, the Parvin Omnidirectional Beam Array, and recently with the introduction of the Ethereum Revelation, we did get beam arrays from that, which which deals pure proton damage. However, off of that ship, they only come in beam array form, and the weapons themselves cannot be upgraded. So they're only going to be at Mark 12 common quality, which means they are not going to do a lot of damage. So instead, I have opted for Protonic Polaron, a dual heavy cannon, which I have not been able to properly re-engineer because I do not have a lot of salvage. It is expensive setting up new damage types. And the reason why I set up these weapons, even though they're polar weapons, is because they're the only other weapons that actually even deal proton damage. And whilst they have the proc on these weapons are a little bit weird. On a 25% chance whenever I get a crit, it'll do proton damage. Now, this proc chance only rerolls when you get a critical hit. It's not like a 2.5% proc, so like whenever you hit an enemy or something. It's like whenever you get a critical hit, which is in by itself a chance, is an extra chance to deal more proton damage. So whilst this proc will be going off more often than standard procs, it's by no means going to be effective. I'm also running the Parvin Proton Energy Torpedo Launcher. This was event gear, but if you do not have this, then you can't really do this build since the Parvin set really does do a lot for this build. But this torpedo launcher basically does a whole bunch of proton damage. It also has the chance to increase resistance charges, which allows you to deal way more proton damage. For my drivetrain, this may look a little bit different because this is actually the Dyson set. And the reason why I'm running this set is because of its 3-piece, which is the Dyson, the Proton Barrage, which basically allows me to fire off a proton barrage. Although it's less like a barrage and more like a giant shotgun. This does have a 6 kilometer range, so keep it in mind. Whilst it does deal a decent amount of proton damage, keep in mind this does have a 1 minute and 30-second recharge time. And I've actually found another use for it. You see these chances to strip buffs? This is actually really handy on tactical and engineering captains that don't have access to subnucleonic beam, which is a ability for science captains that allows them to strip buffs from enemies. So if you're like going in a hive onslaught with this build and you're fighting the queen, she activates her feedback pulse. Just blast this onto her, and then she won't be able to feedback pulse you at all. So I've just got the deflector. I'm still running the prevailing innovative impulse engine because I've got a lot of my auxiliary power right there, and I don't have a lot of engine power. So whatever speed I can get, I will gladly take. You may notice that my warp core is not fully upgraded, and truth be told, I did run out of upgrades for this. But in my research with this warp core, I found out that the only thing you actually get at epic quality is weapons to shields, which I've calculated is only going to be increasing my shield power by 11 power points. So that's really not going to be a whole lot of damage. Actually, no damage at all. And I've got the Dyson Regenerative Shield Array because I just need that for the 3-piece. Now, that being said, you by no means need to actually have all of these sets up. The only reason why I had these is for the Proton Barrage set, which isn't going to do a lot of damage. So if you do want to, you could also run the Discovery 3-piece to get access to the extra hull regeneration and mycelial lightning, and that will do you no worse. My after weapons, I've got the omnidirectional Parb and Proton Beam Array, which is, should be honest, this is literally one of the best proton. Well, is actually the best proton weapon within the game because of its ability to spread resonance charges, which deals a heck of a ton of damage. And in my experimental weapons, I've got the experimental dual heavy proton emitter, which comes from the tier 6 Dyson chips. Truth be told, there is another proton experimental weapon that you can get, which is from one of the Zindi ships in the low-buy store. I would recommend getting that if you're going to be serious about this build, because the damage on this particular weapon is absolutely pitiful. And I've only got it on here for the Proton thing, but I would legit swap this out for another better weapon if you wanted to get more damage out of this thing. In my devices, first I've just got the Kobayashi Mirror Transponder for random buffs, Deuterium Surplus for the speed buffs, Advanced Battery Energy Amplifiers for the bonus energy weapon damage, and Reactive Armor Catalyst for the quick heals. In my universal consoles, first I've got the Proton Eruptor module from the low-LAR Intel Dyson Science Destroyer. That's the Cleon one. And apart from this thing having a 1-minute recharge time, this thing has actually wormed its way onto the EPG meta because of the sheer amount of damage it does, which scales with your EPG power levels. Or not your EPG, well, not your EPG power levels, but your EPG skill. It does not scale with Ox power, from what I figured out. But this does deal a heck of a ton of Proton damage, and it actually chains that damage up to 3 nearby targets, which is pretty handy. Next, I've got the DPR RAM. This should be obvious for the damage buff and for the extra survivability. In my engineering consoles, I do have 3 Polaron ISO mags. Despite me building this build for Proton damage, my main damage dealers are going to be the Protonic Polaron dual heavy cannons, which in themselves are Polaron weapons, so might as well blow them up. In the science consoles, I've got the enhanced induction cores to help buff up the fleet power network array, which I've got down here as well. These are staples on most of my builds. Next, I've got Protonic Snare Projector, which comes from the Typhoon Temporal Battle Cruiser. This console does a bunch of proton damage, but this console on its own is very finicky, and that is, it has a really nasty habit of going backwards. So what I like to do is you want to actually stop, and then you want to aim your ship at the target you want to shoot it at, because despite the fact that this console will activate whenever you have a target selected, it's actually an aimable console. It will not travel directly to your target. You actually got to aim your ship at it. So what I like to do is I like to stop completely still, aim my ship at the target, and then fire. And this thing does a surprising amount of damage once you're meant to get it off. Next, I've got the subspace reactor tunneling field from the Voven. Again, should be obvious for the console recharge times. I already went over the fleet power network array. This is the Parvin Crystal battery, which is the console from the Parvin Proton super weapon reset. It has a 3-second cooldown and shared cooldown and cannon firing range, which is handy. 8% firing cycle lasts for energy weapons is really handy, and a 69, nice, 0.8% buff to proton damage, which is really huge considering it is the biggest buff to proton damage you can get in the game. There is a set bonus with these in the Torpedo and Omni Beam. However, I would not recommend using the clicky off of it because it will consume all your stacks of resonance charge, which it's not really handy because this thing does not do a lot of damage. The only reason why I would consider even using this is because it has a 15-kilometer targeting range, so you can just snipe an enemy away from you and just fire on something else and hope that the beam from all the way across the damn galaxy, because keep in mind, this is firing from Parvo, actually does enough damage to kill the target. Next, I've got auto-targeting modules from the, actually, I should probably explain these. The Dyson Proton weapon is a reputation reward from the Dyson Joint Command set. The Protonic Polaron weapons are actually from this store. You can find them right here in the dilithium store. You can get them for a decent amount of dilithium. As well as these auto-targeting modules, you can also get them in the dilithium store from the Tactical Console set. And the reason why I've got these is because they further buff proton damage, give you a bit of extra accuracy, which isn't really going to be handy, and a 19.7% proton damage buff individually. And here I've got the Proton Particle Stabilizer, which gives me extra weapons and engine power, EPS Plasma Flow buff, which isn't really going to be a big thing, and 17.2% proton damage. This is another console from the Dyson Reputation set, and this actually has a set bonus with the Dyson Proton weapon. 2 pieces bonus, gives me extra photon projectile weapon damage, which I checked. It does not scale. It does not buff the Parvin. It does not buff the Parvin torpedo, but it does enable. It does give 3% crit chance, which is good because I am not using the fleet colony deflector, so I'm missing out on that crit chance. But this set bonus actually gives it back, which is pretty nice. For my captain specialization, things looking a little bit differently. I'm running Temporal Primary and Miracle Worker Secondary, and the reason why I'm doing these is because Temporal Operative in the primary spec gives me access to continuity, which is basically like a get out of jail free card when it comes to dying. And Miracle Worker Secondary for the extra hull regeneration. Now, the reason why I'm running these is because I'm not using the Discovery Drive Trade, which usually gives me 120% hull regeneration, which is, pretty big. But since I'm not running with those, I'm going to be struggling a lot more for survivability, so whatever I can get helps. In my personal space traits, first I've got Adaptive Offense for the crit chance it becomes crit severity. Fun 6 is the king, so the second damage resistance rating on damage based on how much damage I took. Regenerative Control Synergy for some extra survivability when I'm using Control Bridge Officer ability. Intelligence Agent Attaché to restore the cooldown to my captain's abilities when I'm getting a critical hit. Superior Cannon Training for the bonus cannon weapon damage. Terror Targeting Systems for the extra crit severity. Unconventional Systems to restore the cooldowns to my universal consoles. The Boimler effect for the recharging my bridge officers. Inspirational Leader for 10 plus 10 to most starship skills when it does activate off my bridge officer abilities. A Good Day to Die, which lets me use Go Down Fighting whenever I want. And Fleet Coordinator for the bonus or damage per team member. My Starship traits, first I'm running Emergency Weapon Cycle. This one should be pretty obvious, it's on most energy weapon builds. This one's here for the minus 50 weapon power cost and 20% firing cycle haste when it's up. Inertial Supremacy, which comes from the Alliance Rex, and this is basically just debuffs my enemies whenever I activate an AoE weapon firing mode. Next up, I've got Point Defense Protocols, which you can get from the Infinity Lockboxes, but it isn't bound to a ship, so this is pretty cheap off the exchange. And the reason why I've got this on the build is because it does proton damage whenever I have an energy weapon enhancement active, which is basically any energy weapon firing mode that isn't a subsystem targeting firing mode. Next, I've got the Ruin of Our Enemies from D7. This is for the hitter for the bonus damage whenever I kill an enemy, which can stack up to 100 times. Withering Barrage, which is the extension trait for Cannon Scatter Volley. Thirst for Battle, which comes from the Legendary Bortask, and I'm just using this for the extra speed. However, if you've completed your endeavors, you will not be suffering nearly as much from the speed penalty as I will be, so if you don't want to use this, that's fine by me. You can just use whatever you want. I'm just using it here because since I haven't completed my endeavors, I'm lacking a bit on speed. And finally, I've got Temporal Tunneling for the extra amount of firing cycle haste it has when it activates. In my spatial reputation, first I've got Advanced Targeting Systems for the extra crit severity, Magnified Firepower for the extra bonus weapon damage, Tars Duality for the extra crit chance based on my hull capacity, Precision, which is just straight up crit chance, and Energy Refrequency, which heals my hull when I deal damage. In my bridge officer stations, in the Lieutenant Commander seat, which I'm using as a science seat, I'm using Jam Sensors 1 and Scramble Sensors 1 for conventional systems procs, and I'm also using Photonic Officer 2 for the extra cooldown. My Lieutenant Commander seat, which I'm using as a tactical seat, I've got Chemosite Lace Weaponry 1 for the extra radiation damage, Tech Pad and Beta 1 for the extra debuff, and Torpedo Spread 3 to buff the Parvin torpedoes. In the Lieutenant seat, which I'm using as a temporal / engineering seat, first I've got Heisenberg Amplifier, which is basically the best unconventional systems trigger in the game because of its low cooldown, and this also triggers temporal tunneling. And I'm using Emergency Power Weapons 2 here to get bonus infantry weapon damage and to trigger Emergency Weapon Cycle. In the ensign seat, I've just got Tractor Beam 1 for the extra unconscious triggers. In my tactical / intel seat, first I'm using Viral Impulse Burst, Ionic Turbulence, which are both unconventional systems triggers. I'm using Override Subsystem Safeties 3 here for the extra power levels, which will buff up the Fleet Power Network Array that much more. And I'm using Cannon Scatter Volley 3 since, both of that this is a Cannon Scatter Volley build, I might as well just use the best firing mode version of it. Oh, hey again, Jellicoe, didn't expect to see you here. In my duty officer roster, first I've got 29 to 47, which gives me extra power levels whenever I activate a science ability. I've got 3 energy weapons officers with buff crit severity. However, if I was smart and if I actually had the energy crits, I would actually swap these out for crit chance for duty officers, which will buff the proc on the protonic polaron weapons to allow that to trigger that much more. I've got a Space Warfare Specialist that deals extra damage against Borg, and I've got a Crit Severity Projectile Weapons Officer. So now that you've seen what is on this build, let me take you through a run of IC, and then I'll show you the pass. Stay tuned! $501k DPS, which I'll admit is a little bit above what I expected this thing to do. And again, this IC run was one of the more smoother runs I had, because it appears that my teammates were actually kind of competent. For the most part, 25k, you should not be doing elite content, mate. Anyway, as we go into the analysis, you can see that my top damage dealer was the Neptune Snare, which is the console off of the Typhoon, which for 123k, especially this being a free console, is pretty good. But then again, you do need to aim this thing and actually, put some thought into it before firing this off. This is not your average console. You need to actually think before firing this off. But if you're able to actually do all of that, this wing will reward you handsomely. Next up, we've got the dual heavy protonic polaron cannons and the cannon scatterbody 3, which did 103k. Then underneath that, resonance shock, which did 58k. Now, this seems a little low, considering that most of my other runs that I've been passing into this thing, I actually managed to get this thing to like 80k, 90k, but 58k is not bad, especially for a proc. Next, we've got destabilized proton eruption. That's the low last console, 52k. Then the Dyson proton weapon and cannon scatterbody 3, 35k. The Carbon Proton Torpedo and the Spread 3 did 28k, and Point Defense Protocols, that's that trait, that did 15k as well, which is not bad. Especially for a trait that's DPS was only listed to deal 700 DPS per second. I have no idea what is buffing this up so much, but you know what, I'm all here for it. And then underneath that, experimental dual heavy proton emitter with a measly 12k DPS. That is absolutely pitiful. So yeah, if you want to go for that other Zindi ship that I mentioned earlier, if you really want to, that thing's experimental weapon will definitely do more damage than this. Underneath that, I got Entropic Rider, and that did 7k, and Proton Particle Burn. This is the proc of the Protonic Polaron weapons, and this did 3.1k, which, is more damage than most other procs will do, but 3.1k is nothing to be, gung-ho about. On the above that, Proton Particle Burn, which, not Proton Particle Burn, Proton Barrage, I can speak, that did 4.3k DPS. That was just that. I think I only managed to fire that off maybe once or twice in that run. I can't remember exactly how many times. But I also decided to take this thing through a supported run of IC, so I grabbed 3 other people in the DPS channels and I took this thing through a run of IC, and in that run I managed to get 807k DPS, which is pretty good. But if we go into the analysis, things are looking a little bit different. My top 2 damage dealers are Cannon Scatter Volley 3 with the dual heavy protonic polarizing cannons and Resonant Shock. And that was because everybody was buffing my haste so much that those things actually did do most of my damage. Next we got the Dyson Proton Weapon on Cannon Scatter Volley 3, then Destabilized Proton Eruption and did 71k. Neptune Snare didn't do nearly as much damage in this run, and I think that's because I ended up killing a lot of things before this thing actually had the ability to travel towards their foes, towards my enemies that actually, deal its damage. Point Difference Protocols actually did a surprising 24k, and underneath that, Experimental Dual Heavy Proton Miner under 21k. That thing is just not good. So, that was my Proton Cannon Scalar Volley build on the Adamant Intel Heavy Raider. I genuinely had a lot of fun flying this ship around, and I'll be flying around for quite a fair bit. Before I do my usual outro stuff, do you like my new profile picture? Yeah, I commissioned FewCube over on Twitter to make me a new profile picture since I wanted a more professional feel for this channel, and she absolutely cooked with this one. I'm going to link her Twitter down below, so make sure to check her out and commission her if you've wanted something done. Anyway, let me know what you think of this build down below. Remember to like, subscribe. This is YouTube, you know the deal, but it really does help me out, and I do like to get monetized. Anyway, my name is Galactic Gaming. Jellicoe will not leave me the hell alone, so I'm going to leave now. Have an amazing day, everyone. And until next time, keep having fun, and I'll see you around. Bye-bye!